This is Dr. Steve Johnson, and this is short-term counseling class module 4, where the topics will be the critical A, how to get that critical A and distinguish that from just the activating event, and the differences between inferences and beliefs, two different kinds of cognitions that are important. First, let's look at the differences between the activating event and the critical activating event. Before I do that, I just want to say that it is really important within REBT, this particular short-term model, that we don't settle on just identifying an activating event, but the actual critical activating event. So always push forward for the critical. The difference is an activating event is just any situation or an event that is associated with some kind of dysfunctional emotion or behavior. And so it's going to be more general. The critical activating event is that part of the situation or the event about which the client disturbs himself or herself the most, either emotionally or behaviorally. But we're going to be talking largely about emotions. So it is that part of the event that about which the client is experiencing the most disturbance, okay? And that's what we want to find out for several reasons. Let me give an example. Let's say that Alex is angry that he was fired at the end of the day on Friday, end of the week. So when asked what part of getting fired was he most angry about, he said that it was immediately after he finished a project that was going to make the company a lot of money. So if I'm getting prepared to begin to do therapy with Alex, the second wave REBT therapy, I know that the activating event is the general problem, and that is that he got fired at the end of the day on Friday. But apparently it is not just getting fired that was the problem. There was something about that event that was more critical to him being angry than anything else. And he said that he identified that. He said it was getting fired immediately after he finished this project that was going to make them a lot of money. So the general event would be kind of getting fired. That's the general activating event. But it is that it was the timing of it, that they did it immediately after he finished a large project for them to make a lot of money. Okay, so he's not real happy about that. Example 2. Let's say that Samantha is feeling hurt after a conversation with her best friend, in which the friend says that Samantha tends to lose a lot of friends because she's overly sensitive. And so I want to know what we need to kind of focus on with Samantha if she comes in and says she wants to work on this feeling of hurt. Well, we know that the activating event is, in general, the conversation that she had with her best friend. But the critical part of that activating event is that the friend said directly to her that she tends to lose a lot of friends because she's overly sensitive. So it's not just the conversation. It is that very specific part of that conversation, the words that were said, that serves as the critical activating event for Samantha. So again, it's imperative that we do our best to get the critical activating event. And usually it's quite simple. If they tell us a story and they're upset and they have an emotion about it, then we'll go, in that event, what was the most significant to why you are experiencing the emotion that you're experiencing? And then I'm asking them for the critical activating event. And I said, this is the importance. One of the importance is in identifying the critical activating event is that it's more concrete. And having a concrete critical activating event is really, really important, because if the client thinks about that critical activating event, then thinking about that will tend to trigger their dysfunctional beliefs that cause the emotion or behavior that would be that would be there, okay, than would be present in the activating event. So the more concrete, the greater the likelihood that the reflection upon that critical activating event, that concrete, is going to generate or trigger the dysfunctional beliefs that directly cause the emotions and behaviors. Also, it is that the activating event is general, and so there are a lot of aspects to an event, but not every aspect is the client going to have some kind of negative or unhelpful, irrational belief. It'll only be certain parts, or maybe even one part in that event, that they're going to have beliefs that are dysfunctional, that cause the dysfunctional emotions and behaviors. Okay, so this is why it's imperative that we get the critical activating event and not just the activating event. Okay, now let's go to this whole issue, and I'll just be honest that many students find this the most difficult concept to grasp, and I'm going to spend some time on this. But let's introduce the notions of inferences and beliefs and how to distinguish them by first talking about cognitions. Cognition simply means a thought or thinking. And we break these cognitions down into multiple types, but for this course, we're going to divide them in two important different types of cognitions: beliefs and inferences. And we're going to look at those differences. And then, of course, under beliefs, there are helpful beliefs and unhelpful beliefs. Okay, but they all are forms of cognitions. Now, what's the difference? What's the difference between an inference and a belief? Well, let's say this, and then I'm going to give you a couple of ways that you can do this a little bit later, a few minutes from now. An inference, of course, is a type of cognition or thought, and its function is to interpret a situation or event. Interpreting a situation or event means that we give meaning to, we attribute meaning to that situation or event. Now, inferences are the kind of cognition that have truth value. That means they're either true or false, right? Beliefs, on the other hand, also a type of cognition, but they don't interpret events. They're not after the meaning of the event. They evaluate the situation or the event. Don't interpret, but they evaluate. Beliefs are not true or false because our evaluation does not have truth value. Beliefs are more pragmatic in the sense, the evaluation of them is more pragmatic because beliefs are either helpful or unhelpful in us reaching the goal. Not true or false, but helpful or unhelpful. Okay, so that's going to be a big point. So if you have a statement that is made by a client and you're trying to figure out whether that statement is an inference or belief, look to see whether hypothetically that statement is either true or false. If it's not and it's an evaluation, it's a belief. If it does have a truth value, it can be true or false, and it's an interpretation or it's an attribution of meaning to a situation or event, then it is an inference. I know I've said that, we've defined it, but it's a little tricky. Don't freak yourself out. It's just going to be a learning curve to get that worked out in your head, but you'll get there. Let's take some examples. Let's say that Jeremy just got an F on his biology final, and a good friend came up and he said, what are you thinking about getting that F? And so Jeremy responded that now there's no way that he's going to get into medical school. Okay, Jeremy's thought was, there's no way I'm going to get into medical school. That's the thought. That's a cognition. Now, is this an inference or is it a belief? Well, the thought is an interpretation or the meaning that he's giving to the fact that he got an F on the biology exam. And since it's an interpretation or the meaning that he's given to that event, it's an inference. It's not a belief because he doesn't evaluate getting an F. He doesn't say that getting an F is good or bad and that he shouldn't have gotten an F on that, right? Now, some students go, but that's probably what he was thinking. You don't get to do that, and it's not helpful. You can form a hypothesis, but we have to go with what the client says, not what we hypothesize that they are thinking, okay? This is going to be a difference because some therapies have you go with your hypothesis. We don't. Hypothesis is just a hypothesis. And if the thought is an interpretation, it's an inference, it's not a belief. And let's move on to another example. Let's say Ashley just got the results of a physical exam. And she's looking at those results. She noticed that her blood glucose level was slightly elevated. Well, she kind of knows that diabetes runs in the family. And so her immediate thought, cognition, upon looking at the results of the exam was that she's diabetic and will have to go on a very low carbohydrate diet. Okay, so she's got the results of the physical exam. She's looking at those results and she's interpreting those results, right? She's interpreting them as, I'm diabetic and now I'm going to have to go on a low carb diet. Okay, because that's an interpretation of the results, that's an inference. She never states that it's bad. Now, we will presume that later on she's going to have this belief that that's bad, right? But that's not what she stated right there. So what she stated is an inference and not a belief. You cannot suppose that she is negatively evaluating the news. It's likely that she has, but it's not been voiced, and you would have to ask a question and see whether she says that, okay? So don't read too much into an interpretation. Stick with what the client says, okay? Again, that's going to be quite different. So Ashley uttered an inference, not a belief. Inferences, and this one is a tremendously important point. Inferences do not directly cause emotions and behaviors. What proof of this is that we can have different individuals with the same inference, but they can experience a variety of emotions. Why? Because the emotion and the behavior isn't caused by the inference. The emotions and behaviors are largely caused by their beliefs about the situation or event, their evaluation of the situation or event. Let's take an example. Mary learned that she was rejected as a student at Yale University. Okay, that's just a situation, right? Now, if Mary thought she had to get accepted, that would be a belief because that's a must, that's an evaluation, then she might be disappointed or depressed about the rejection. If Mary didn't want to go to Yale, it was her parents' dream, not hers, then she might experience relief or even happiness, okay? And if Mary thought that getting rejected from Yale meant that she would never get accepted to a good school and that would be awful, then she may be experiencing anxiety. So it's the belief that Mary would have that determines the emotion, not an inference, okay? If she had an inference that getting rejected was a big deal, then okay, fine. But it depends on what she believes about that will determine whether she has a functional or dysfunctional emotion. And even if it's a dysfunctional emotion, which dysfunctional emotion does she experience? So keep this in mind. Inferences do not directly cause emotions and behaviors. They set the stage. They're a movement toward that, but it's the beliefs about the situation or the event. That one is, this distinction is crucial for you to keep in mind. So go over this until you kind of get it, okay? Now, let's look at this again. Beliefs are cognitions that evaluate a situation. They don't interpret. They're neither true nor false, but they're helpful or unhelpful. In REBT, an ideal vocabulary for beliefs, both helpful and unhelpful, is created. This is meant to help therapists and clients kind of communicate more clearly. We can have shorthand ways that we can communicate. Clients don't have to use this, but it is very helpful. And if they don't want to use this, then the therapist and the client need to come up with a way to communicate so that they communicate clearly with each other and there's a minimum of misinterpretation. So let's keep that one in mind too. So let's make a distinction between unhelpful and helpful beliefs. Now remember, helpful beliefs and unhelpful beliefs differ in this way. An unhelpful belief tends to yield dysfunctional emotions and unhelpful behaviors, self-sabotaging behaviors, whereas helpful beliefs tend not to cause dysfunctional emotions. The individual may cause negative emotions, but they're helpful negative emotions. And the other thing is that they tend not to sabotage an individual in reaching their desired goals. So the only unhelpful beliefs that we use in REBT are the four that you see on the left there. And those would be demandingness. Demandingness is not something that we voice, it is something that we think. And demandingness usually takes the form of, in English at least, that those sentences or propositions that are demanding in nature tend to have the words should, ought, must, have to, need. You must get an A on this exam. You should study really, really hard. In an absolute sense. So demandingness, okay? And we say that that's the core disturbance producing belief. So it's always going to be there with a dysfunctional emotion. Demandingness will always be there. And with some self-sabotaging belief, it will always be there. Awfulizing and catastrophizing would be where you believe about an event or situation that it is terrible, it's horrible, it's awful, it is like 100% bad, right? That it negates meaning, purpose, and potential happiness. Now, I want to have a caveat there, and it's going to come up in more and more. It is not, if we have one thought that something is awful, for example, if I think, getting COVID would be awful, that is not necessarily problematical. But awfulizing means that we are doing this repeatedly. So if repeatedly I'm believing that something is terrible and horrible and awful, then that tends to be dysfunctional because that will cause emotions that are not helpful for us to reach our goals. We're taking our energy is going into awfulizing repeatedly and very strongly rather than getting on with the business of life. Frustration intolerance. Lynn Clark, the author of your text, says that he calls it I can't stand-itis. This is when we believe that something, I can't stand this is too much, this is overwhelming. Those are thoughts. Some people think that overwhelming is a feeling or an emotion. It's not, it's a thought. And when you're overwhelmed, when you believe that you're overwhelmed, then you have particular emotions about that. Usually that's anxiety or even depression. Frustration, intolerance is problematical. It is the core of anxiety. It is the core of addictions. It is a core problem. And Albert Ellis, the founder of Rational Emotive Behavioral Therapy, says it's kind of present in about 99% of the population, and the other 1% is simply not telling the truth. In addition to these very dysfunctional beliefs, there is kind of a global negative evaluation, and that global negative evaluation, the object of that can be the self. I think that I'm a loser, I'm hopeless, I'm beyond redemption, I'm no good. So that would be a global negative self-evaluation. Or, I'm fine, but you're no good, you're a loser, etc. would be global negative evaluation of the other. And we could globally negative evaluate the life. Life is meaningless, it's purposeless, it's no good, it's nothing but a veil of tears, right? So we're kind of globally negatively evaluating life and the world. Now, let's look at the helpful corollaries to those. Where if demandingness, having the shoulds, the oughts, the musts, the have-tos, and the needs are dysfunctional and unhelpful, the helpful alternative would be, instead of the demand, that we have preferences. We prefer, we wish, we want, we hope. Because if we have a preference and it doesn't come about, we're not going to be as upset as we are as if we have this demand on reality, the self, others, life, world, and that doesn't come through, then we've really set the stage for major disturbance. Whereas if we have a preference, even as if it's a very strong preference, and it doesn't happen, then the dysfunctionality that results is not going to be great. Instead of awfulizing and catastrophizing, the helpful alternative would to be just to realistically recognize the badness of a situation, but not to escalate it up to something that is terribly horrible and awful, and to do that repeatedly over time. And instead of frustration intolerance, the I can't stand it, frustration tolerance is really the thought or the belief, I don't like it. I really dislike it, but I can stand it. In fact, I am standing it while I complain about it, right? Even when someone says they can't stand it and they have frustration intolerance, they're standing it. So that's in part why it's so illogical. Instead of the global negative evaluation of self, others, life, and the world, we want unconditional acceptance of the self. Now, and others in life and world. Let's take unconditional acceptance of the self. While we may not like every aspect of our personality, we may not like our actions at times, but we don't globally rate ourselves because of that, because it's not helpful. One, we are too complex, and anything that you choose to make a global evaluation about yourself is going to be an arbitrary choice, which is utterly illogical. Same for others, same for the life, and same for the world, For example, right now people are looking at life with COVID, and they're going, they think that life is utterly worthless. But COVID is one aspect of life. There are many other aspects of life. Why lump those in and make a global negative evaluation of it? It's generally not helpful. It will cause depression, anxiety, and any number of things. So discerning, we want to know from the client whether about a particular situation or event, whether they're holding unhelpful beliefs or helpful beliefs. And part of the goal of the therapy will be to help the client let go of unhelpful beliefs and to adopt more helpful ones. And we will have strategies for doing that. Cognitive, behavioral, and emotive strategies and interventions to help people make that shift, because if they make that shift, they're going to experience more functional emotions, more adaptive emotions, and more adaptive behaviors. So let's look at the differences between helpful and unhelpful beliefs. Now remember, I said this a couple of weeks ago, but we've covered a lot of grounds, and so sometimes repeating these distinctions are really important. The difference between a helpful and an unhelpful belief is not the intensity of the belief, but the degree to which the belief sabotages us in reaching our goals. Remember those personal, interpersonal, professional, and spiritual goals. We do not look at the difference based upon the situation. We don't say that a belief is helpful or unhelpful based on the seriousness of the situation. So if I believe that this is awful and the situation is very serious, some people would go, well, that's a helpful belief. No. The A, or the critical activating event, does not determine in any way the helpfulness or unhelpfulness of the belief. Okay, so let's keep that straight. The other thing is, even unhelpful beliefs are normal. Why? Because humans are prone to disturbance, and we're not fully rational. That's just the nature of what it means to be a messed up human, right? Which is a normal one. So our unhelpful beliefs are normal. They're just not helpful. They tend to sabotage us in reaching goals, and they cause some really dysfunctional emotions. So keep these distinctions in mind, okay? Let's practice distinguishing helpful and unhelpful beliefs. So let's take a situation. James has applied for a job during COVID and was offered the position. However, he finds out the day before the job was to start, he was contacted and informed that the company decided to reconsider, and they're going to postpone launching that position, or maybe not even be able to do it. So what I want you to do, and I'm just going to give you 5 different beliefs. There are no inferences here. They're all beliefs. Which among these following beliefs would be helpful and which unhelpful? So let's look at number 1. This is awful. This is about James and his situation. This is awful because my savings is almost completely spent. And then I'm so stupid. I'm absolutely have to do this. I wish I had gotten that job, but I didn't. So I guess I'll keep looking. Not getting the job is a big problem, but not the end of the world. So let's look at this, because 1 through 3 are unhelpful and 4 and 5 are helpful. But let's look at why. Let's look at number 1. This is awful because my savings is almost completely spent. Well, this is a form of awfulizing. And if a person spends time doing this, how is that helpful in any way? It may just cause some kind of dysfunctional emotion. I'm so stupid. I should have applied to the first job I considered. Wait a minute. One is there is 2 irrational beliefs in that statement. One is I'm so stupid, which is a form of global negative self-rating, and I should have applied to the first job I considered is a demand. So we have 2 irrational, unhelpful beliefs there. Putting the self down is not helpful if you've lost a job or you're not getting the job. And to say that you should have applied to the first one when you didn't, you can't rewrite history, so why bother with that, right? It's not helpful. Third, I absolutely have to get a job right now. Utterly irrational. Of course it might be nice for you to get a job. And in fact, it might be highly preferential for you to get a job. It would be great to get a job. But to demand absolutely that you get the job is not going to help you get the job, and also might increase your stress so that you decrease the likelihood that you get a job. Now let's look at 4 and 5. I wish I had gotten that job, but I didn't, so I guess I will keep looking. Why is this rational? 1, it's not demanding, it's preferential in nature. Remember, a preference, a helpful belief is preferential. A wish, a want, a hope. I wish I had gotten that, but I didn't, so I will keep looking. And notice that the belief, I wish I'd gotten it, but I didn't, so I guess I'll keep looking. So the behavior that results, the continue to look, is much better than just saying it's awful and kind of giving up. 5, not getting the job is a big problem, but not the end of the world. So this is to recognize the badness of not getting the job, but not escalating that up to being awful or horrible whatsoever. It's not the end of the world. It's inconvenient, highly inconvenient, okay? So be sure that you understand those differences. If you have any question about that, be sure to get a hold of me. So let's go back, because I said there are ways that we can distinguish between inferences and beliefs. And again, I said this can be challenging. But if you do one of the 2 ways or both of these ways, then you're going to make fewer errors until you get this concept down, and then it just becomes second nature. The first way we've already talked about, and that is to remember that inferences are interpretations, or the attribution of meaning to a situation or event, whereas beliefs are not interpretations, they are evaluations of goodness or badness or worthwhileness, etc. Way 2 is if you have trouble with way one, and some people do, they confuse that anyway. Way two is if a statement is not on the list of unhelpful or unhelpful beliefs, then it's an inference. In other words, if it's not a form of demandingness, if it's not a form of awfulizing and catastrophizing, not a form of frustration and intolerance, not a form of global negative evaluation, then, or the helpful corollary, it's not a belief. If it's not one of those, it's not a belief. It's an inference, okay? So that's one way that you can do it. Use whichever way works for you, or if you go, I'm going to try way one, and then I'm going to test it by using way two, fine. Whatever works, whatever is functional for you. Practice this, and you'll have plenty opportunity to practice this in the remainder of the course. So this one is important too, because clients don't know that when they come in that their job is to make it easier for you. I'm being facetious. Clients will just say what they say. And sometimes they'll say their statements they make are just going to be an inference only. Sometimes that statement may be a belief only. And sometimes it may be more complex and have an inference and a belief within it. And sometimes an inference and several beliefs, right? So we want to be able to distinguish this. One, so we need to know whether it's inference or belief, but also if the statement has both an inference and a belief within it. So let's look at this. So let's look at these 5 statements and let's determine whether it's an inference only, a belief only, or a combination. My car bumper just got a dent and its value will now be lower. What do you think? Do you think it's an inference, a belief, or a combination? So an inference means it would be an interpretation of event, right? The event here is that the car bumper got a dent in it. A belief would not be giving meaning to it or interpreting. It would be an evaluation that this is bad, this is horrible, whatever. And or it's a combination. So what do you think? Let's move to the next one. I can't stand it that someone got a dent in my car door. Let a dent, doesn't make any sense. I can't stand that someone made a dent in my car door, okay? Is this an inference? Is that an interpretation of that event, of finding a dent in their car door? Is it a belief? Are they evaluating that in some way? Or are they evaluating their response to that? Or is it a combination? Okay, make a choice. Third, anyone who fails to vote is a total loser. Now, is that an interpretation? Is that the meaning that someone is giving to it? Or does it go beyond that and it's an evaluation of goodness, badness, character, whatever, okay? Or is it a combination of both? I hope that every eligible voter actually votes, right? Again, is that an inference? Is it a belief? Or is it a combination? And then finally, not voting means you don't care about America, and that is horrible. Inference only, belief only, or a combination. Well, let's look. My car bumper just got a dent and its value will now be lower. It's an inference, and it's only an inference. What's the event? That the car bumper got a dent in it. The inference is what? The meaning that the individual is giving to that is that its value will be lower. Why is this an inference? It's either true or false. Either the value of the car will be, will go up or down or stay the same, right? So this is an inference. It has truth value. It's either true or false. Okay? No evaluation whatsoever. It didn't say it's bad. It didn't say it's horrible. Any of those kinds of things. I can't stand it that someone made a dent in my car door. This is a belief only. What kind of belief? Well, remember, we have 2 ways that we can determine a belief. One is it an interpretation or evaluation? It is an evaluation. It's the evaluation of their response to this in many ways. right? That they can't stand it. Way two would be, is this I can't stand it on the list of unhelpful beliefs? Yes, it's a form of frustration intolerance. And frustration intolerance is an unhelpful belief. Okay. Anyone who fails to vote is a total loser, right? It's a belief only. Why? Because it's an evaluation of a person, not just giving a meaning to not losing, but they're evaluating the person if they don't vote. And the other way is this to determine whether it's a belief or an inference, is this a form of unhelpful belief that is listed on the list of unhelpful beliefs? Yes, absolutely it is. It is a form of a negative other evaluation, global negative other evaluation. So that is one of the irrational forms of belief. I hope that every eligible voter actually votes. Now, is this an inference? Is this the interpretation of people voting? No. Is this an evaluation? Yes, it's an evaluation. It's not a demand, though. It's a preference. So it's a belief, but it is a helpful belief, not an unhelpful belief. Okay? Not voting means you don't care about America, and that is horrible. Is that an inference, belief, or a combination? Well, let's look at it. Not voting means you don't care about America. That's an interpretation of not voting, right? What's the meaning of it? It means you don't care about America. So that's an interpretation. So that seems to be an inference. But let's look at the other part. And that is horrible. That's an evaluation. That's not just an interpretation. Is it on the list of unhelpful beliefs? Yes, it's a form of awfulizing or a catastrophizing, okay? So this statement is made up of two parts. The first part is an inference, and the second part is a belief. So when you see statements from clients or you hear them, check out whether it's an inference only, a belief only, and then if it is a belief, is it a helpful belief, unhelpful belief, or whether it's a combination of inference and belief, okay? So I hope this little practice was helpful. We're going to get a lot more practice in the course on this, okay? So let's take case and just go through this. Alfred is currently enrolled in a short-term counseling course, and on the quiz covering inferences and beliefs, he scores a 72%. Well, he's been thinking that this means that there's a good possibility he won't end up with an A in the course. But I guess in his thinking, this wouldn't be horrible. However, his dad will be angry if he doesn't get an A in the course, and that would be horrible. What is the critical activating event? Okay. The critical activating event is that he took a quiz in the short-term counseling class and over inferences and beliefs, and he scored 72%. 72%. That's the critical activating event. There's no other event here, right? What are all the inferences? What are the statements within that paragraph that he is giving an interpretation to the event? Well, let's look at it. He's been thinking that this means there's a good possibility that he won't end up with an A in the course. Is that an inference? Yes, that's the meaning that he's giving to scoring to 72%. What is the meaning? That he may not end up with an A in the course, that he won't end up with that, right? This wouldn't be horrible. Is that an inference? No. However, his dad will be very angry if he doesn't get an A in the course. Is that an inference? Yes. That's the meaning that he's giving to him scoring a 72%. So the meaning or the interpretation of that is that his dad's going to get angry if he doesn't get an A in the course. And that would be horrible. Is that an inference? No. So what are the beliefs? Well, we've already said that he's thinking that the that getting a 72% on the quiz means that there's a good possibility that he won't end up with an A in the course. That's an interpretation. That's an inference. This wouldn't be horrible. That is a belief. That is the opposite of catastrophizing or awfulizing. So this is a helpful negative belief. It wouldn't be horrible. He's evaluating it, but he's evaluating it in a helpful way. But it's a belief. What about his dad will get angry if he doesn't get an A in the course? Well, again, that's an interpretation. That was an inference. We already identified that. And that would be horrible. Well, that would be horrible if his dad got angry is a belief. That's an evaluation. And is it a helpful or unhelpful? It's an unhelpful negative evaluation. What sort of unhelpful belief is that? It's an example of awfulizing or catastrophizing. Okay, so we got all the beliefs. And then we looked at whether the beliefs are helpful or unhelpful. So that's how you go through a statement of a client. Now, for me right now, I can identify this very, very quickly, but I've done this a few years. But you may just have to methodically go through this and test it in the way that I just tested it, okay? And don't rush that process. Give yourself some time, because it's like, riding a bike. You're not going to be perfect at it. I remember when I learned how to ride a bike, I could ride it. I could stay upright, but I didn't know how to stop. I didn't know how to use the brakes. So instead of that, I just ran into my dad's car, right? I finally learned how to stop the car without running into Dad's car, and Dad was quite relieved when I was able to do that. This is just a habit. It's a habit of learning how to identify these different forms of cognitions into inferences and beliefs. Okay, so practice this, and you will get much better. Well, that is the end of this. Now, keep in mind, you may need to watch this, and this video is a little bit shorter. You may need to watch this several times, and when you have an assignment on it, that you keep this in mind, your notes with you as you go and look at the assignment where I'm having you evaluate something or identify an inference or a belief. Any questions whatsoever, you know how to get a hold of me by emailing through Canvas, and have a good day.